Hey, welcome to Store Brand Comics. I'm Tio and I talk about comic books. And today we are continuing the series about My Hero Academia with volumes. Had to remind myself which three volumes I'm talking about. Volumes 7, 8, and 9. So this collection of volumes 7, 8, and 9 is particularly interesting in that this is kind of the beginning of the end of Act 1 of My Hero Academia, if that makes any sense. Like, these are the 3 volumes where things start ramping up like really hard. Like, you can tell that the series is starting to barrel towards an end of sorts, though it's not the end of the series, obviously, since the series is still ongoing. It's more just the end of the first part of the series. So yeah, one thing that I find particularly interesting, also throughout like these 3 books, is the focus on Bakugo as a character. Because he did get a bit of focus early on as Deku's main rival, but as the series has gone on, he kind of fell a little more towards the background, became more a part of the larger class. He's still important considering the fact that during the sports festival tournament, he got to have a fight with Todoroki, just like Deku did. And Todoroki, like, his profile as a character started to get elevated during that whole sports festival thing. But like Bakugo, while you can still see that he's an important character, doesn't feel as important through like the sports festival as he was like earlier on in the series, because he has less direct interaction with Deku during that particular sequence of events. And obviously, you know, the audience perception of the main character or supporting characters is going to be colored by their interaction with the main character, obviously, because we're trained to view the main character as, like, you know, the all-important center of a series. So the less the supporting cast interacts with them, the less important that supporting cast seems to be. So yeah, Bakugo just kind of feels like he moves a little more to the wayside for the sports festival arc, even though I would say he is very much put as front and center as characters like Todoroki were. But during the internship arc / fight with Stain, Bakugo is absolutely put on the back burner so that they can take on the Stain thing, which is concluded at the beginning of this book. Because the previous volume, almost dropped it, the previous volume ended towards the end of the fight with Stain. And since this is the conclusion of that, I'm okay spoiling it now. It's Deku, Todoroki, and Ida who are fighting against Stain. Ida having the most personal reason to fight him, with his older brother having been one of Stain's previous victims. So Todoroki and Deku basically show up to help Ida fight Stain, even though none of them are supposed to be fighting villains because none of them have hero licenses. And this shouldn't come as a shock. It does end as a victory for the good guys, because the good guys win. But the thing is, Stain has the chance to kind of throw his ideology out into the world through this fight, and he has a bit of an association with the League of Villains at this point, even though he does not want that association. So there are misguided people who agree with and buy into Stain's philosophy wholeheartedly, and even others who don't necessarily buy into his philosophy but do buy into his actions, and they are attracted to the League of Villains as a result of that. And that's where we get introduced to some fan favorite villains like Toga, who is like a young teenage girl who I don't want to give away what her power is right now because it took a long time after her introduction for the manga to actually like display her powers. So I'm going to leave that a surprise as well. And then there's also Dabi, who is he's got a fun design for a villain. I like him. He's got like his powers is like he shoots blue fire from his hands, so that's really cool. And the leader of the League of Villains, I should say, since I've never actually really touched on the League of Villains members before in these videos, the leader of the League of Villains seems to be this guy called Shigaraki, who he's covered in like these disembodied hands that just grab onto him, and you can tell they're just props. It's an aesthetic. It's a look he's going for. One of these disembodied hands grips onto his face like this, and he just leaves it there so you can't actually see what his face looks like. And his power is that he can disintegrate matter, including organic matter, so that means people, by touching them. I call him, because sometimes just saying Shigaraki, it doesn't always, like, not everyone's going to recognize the name, because Japanese names are hard for Americans to remember. So sometimes I call him Bad Touch, and people usually know who I'm talking about by that name. But yeah, so the League of Villains, they have a whole group. They have members who can magnetize people. They have members who can teleport. One of the members of the League of Villains who shows up in somewhere in these 3 volumes, I don't remember exactly which ones, who can manipulate his own teeth and grow them out in these grotesque, jagged, root-like formations. He's called Moonfish. And he wears he wears a gimp outfit. But not necessarily a gimp. It's a weird leather, bondage outfit. Moonfish is very uncomfortable. Conceptually, he's uncomfortable to look at. He's just unpleasant, which makes him perfect for a villain. But yeah, Moonfish was always one of those villains in this series where just thinking about him wigs me out, man. The Stain fight is concluded at the beginning of Volume 7. And I guess the reason that Bakugo is focused on here is in this cover is because the rest of this volume is dedicated towards the setup and execution of these combat tests that the teachers of UA are putting on for the students of Class 1A, which is Deku's class. Because there are 2 first-year hero course classes, 1A and 1B. And something that the sports festival set up that I didn't really touch on in the previous videos is that a lot of the students in 1B, in fact, a lot of the students in the entire school in general, have a lot of resentment for the students of Class 1A because 1A has had to deal with a lot in terms of villains attacking them specifically, mostly because of their very close proximity to All Might. It all really has a lot to do with timing. And so other students in the school feel like they're being essentially neglected because 1A is getting a lot of attention both from the media and from the teachers just because they seem to be targeted by villains more heavily than the rest of the students are. And that's not 1A's fault, but the rest of the school doesn't care because they're a bunch of petty teenagers. So there's a lot of pressure on 1A from every direction. And The fact that Bakugo, of all people, is in Class 1A does not help that image. Um, because he was cocky, arrogant, self-obsessed, and hot-tempered before that kind of pressure was applied to him. So now he's in a situation where there are a lot of eyes on him, and he doesn't always act accordingly. So in this volume, just to start getting Class 1A prepared for the fights that are coming, because the teachers and the principal of UA have started to recognize, like, a storm is coming, and the peace that this superhero world has enjoyed for a long time, specifically because of characters like All Might, is starting to come to an end. Almost as if the villains of this world are starting to sense All Might's weakness. So all the students in 1A are paired up as a duo and then set against a specific teacher that would challenge each of them in a specific way. Like, for example, there's a teacher named Midnight. You do not want to Google her without safe search on. But she, like, wears this, like, skimpy outfit. She very much, like, uses her body and, like, her sexuality as a weapon, sort of thing. Because her quirk, her power, isn't really combat applicable in the standard sense, other than the fact that she, like, emits this scent or pheromone or hormone or something that can make people fall asleep instantly. So I guess that is kind of combat applicable, but I'm not entirely certain, like, what the success rate of it is. Like, some villains or criminals or what have you might be immune to it, so that might be why, like, she wears, like, a skin-colored, like, I guess, nylon layer over herself. And then when she needs to use her power, she just rips, like, the nylon layer and emits the scent. And there are two guys in the class who are particularly vulnerable to an opponent like that. Because there's this one guy named Sero. I like Sero. His whole power is that his elbows are essentially tape dispensers. So he can shoot, like, these giant strings of scotch tape out of his elbows, which he usually uses for either restraining opponents or, like, mobility. He's effectively Spider-Man, but with tape instead of webs, and not as agile. And he's just got the webs, except it's tape. So, like, he has the power to limit his opponent's mobility the same way that Spider-Man does, and also reach them from a distance. But it's all tape-based. And then he was partnered up with the class pervert, Mineta, who he's this short, compact little dude with, instead of hair on his head, he has these big, sticky purple balls on his head that he can pull off. They regrow instantly, and then, like, he can make them stick to things. And then he himself is also able to bounce off of them. But like I said, he's like the class pervert. So, like, he's girl crazy. Like, he's horny as heck, and he he's just a little weirdo. So like, him and, tape guy Sero getting paired up against this hero who is, like, all about using her sexuality as a weapon. That's a challenge for them. That's something that they have to get past. And there are similar challenges set up for each character, or for each pair of students, throughout these combat tests. And in particular, Deku and Bakugo are paired up as a duo, because of course they are. And they are set against All Might, because of course they are. and All Might is wearing these ridiculously heavy weights through this fight just to try and like kind of even it out. Because even in All Might's like weakened state, the way he is now, he is head and shoulders multiple times above Deku and Bakugo combined in terms of power. So he has to wear these crazy weights on his wrists and ankles to limit himself enough that he can still be a challenge to them, but he's not like life-threatening. So Deku and Bakugo, through this combat test, have to find a way to just get past their hang-ups and work together to fight All Might. And to a certain extent, they do. It takes Deku finally nutting up and like shouting Bakugo down a little bit in some instances, and Bakugo just letting go of his ego a little bit and being willing to cooperate with Deku for the sake of achieving victory in this fight. And again, nothing about their relationship is like miraculously solved through this combat test, but they make a little bit of progress. And the combat test, for the most part, is Volume 7. It doesn't conclude in Volume 7. It concludes in Volume 8. Like, the most, I guess, significant portion of it, for Deku and Bakugo in particular, takes place in Volume 7. And the way that it's handled in the manga is all of the tests are running concurrently with one another. And so the manga kind of jumps between different tests depending on, you know, when it makes the most sense to show each one. The way the anime ended up handling it is every test basically got its own episode, though some of them were like small or quick enough that they were only like half an episode, I think. So because they had to get through that quick. It was towards the end of the season at that point. So yeah, that's one of those fun little things where it's like it was a little different in adaptation, but oh yeah, like let's see here. Oh yeah, the rest of the combat test is like about half of Volume 8 based on what I'm seeing here. Yeah, it doesn't end until a little less than halfway into Volume 8. Okay, so yeah, but I will say once again, the Deku and Bakugo versus All Might fight is really, really fun. It's like a really interesting, good fight. As I've said before, I like good fights in action comics. So and this time Deku and Bakugo were working together rather than fighting each other. Or, well, they were supposed to be working together rather than fighting each other. They still fought each other a little bit in this. But yeah, it was a really interesting and cool fight to read. But basically what happens as a result of these combat tests is, I think, like the pass-fail ratio, if I'm not mistaken, might have been like 50-50. But it basically leads into a training camp arc where the students of class 1A and 1B are all basically collected into one big group, and they all go to this big old training camp together to train under some professional heroes alongside some of the teachers. Now, I don't believe All Might went with on this training camp. I'm pretty sure he stayed back at UA. So, like, if anything went wrong on this training camp, All Might was not available to help. But there is one hero, one of the main, like, teachers who is focused on. He's called Eraserhead, and his, and I haven't really talked about him in the past yet, because he wasn't totally completely relevant yet. Now he is. His power is that he can block someone's superpower as long as he's like maintaining visual contact on them. So if he's staring unblinking at someone, he can cancel out their superpowers. So that's obviously a very limited ability considering, you know, the strain he has to put on his eyes to achieve it. but it's still he still finds ways to fight uh, like entire groups of enemies. Like you would think that groups of enemies would be a weakness for him since he can only block one person's power at a time, but he's found a way to work around that. So yeah, he's like the main teacher who takes them on this training camp, at least from class 1A. From class 1B, it was a different teacher who attended. But yeah, so they trained under some professional heroes. Deku gets, like, I guess a little bit of a personal arc in that he meets this young boy whose parents were heroes and they were killed by a villain. So he is living with these professional heroes because one of them is a relative of his. So this little boy that Deku meets has a negative sort of opinion on the hero lifestyle. As far as he's concerned, like, it's a surefire way to just go out and get yourself killed, basically. So Deku doesn't really try going too far out of his way to change the little kid's opinion because he's a little kid and he's kind of made up his mind about things. So Deku just kind of proves himself to the kid by standing up to protect him in a really difficult situation. Because, surprise of surprises, the training camp gets attacked by villains. The League of Villains, specifically, because of course it does. So, that... Let me see here. Now, that attack does not start, as far as I can see. Yeah, that attack doesn't start in Volume 8. The attack on the training camp starts in Volume 9. And let's look at the cover of Volume 9 in particular real quick, so we can get a nice close look at that. You can see Deku right here on the cover fighting this villain right here. Then there's this big black scary thing in the background. The big black scary thing in the background is related to one of Deku's classmates, who's named Tokoyami. I have a friend who really likes Tokoyami, and I think he's pretty cool too. I just think as far as like the supporting class goes, I prefer Kirishima, the hardening guy. But Tokoyami, he looks like a bird, and but that's not his power. His power is that he's got like this shadow, which is sort of like a living entity within him that he can summon to help him in fights. And its name is Dark Shadow, which is super creative. But yeah, so as you can kind of see on the cover here, there's like a point in this volume where Tokoyami basically wears his shadow like a cloak, like a suit of armor, which was a super cool moment. But let me see here. I'm trying to... Oh yeah, okay. So in Volume 8, Deku gets a really big fight against a villain who actually kind of has similar powers. Because Deku's whole thing, by this point, Deku has learned to distribute the power that All Might gave him across his whole body, but he only uses 5% of it at a time, which is way safer for him than what he was doing before, which was 100% of the power in just one small part of his body, which is how he kept breaking his bones. So now that he just uses 5% across his whole body simultaneously, it's way safer for him to use his abilities. But there's this villain whose power is that he grows his own muscles over his skin and enhances his strength like that, which is disgusting and awesome. So you get this really cool, just like pure super strength fight, which I don't know what it is about big dumb super strength fights, but I've always loved them. Like I love. There are a couple of superhero movies that most people would say aren't very good that I actually really like the final battles of. Like I love the Incredible Hulk and the final battle of that movie because it's just a big super strength fight between two Hulks. I I do actually like the final battle in Man of Steel between Superman and Zod because um, it's a big super strength fight. I don't know what it is about super strength beatdowns. I really like those types of fights with these characters who have like this godlike physical power just beating on each other. So, and while this fight in this book isn't quite on that level, um, I will say it's still like sufficiently epic for the stakes that are presented. But yeah, so this big muscular villain whose name is muscular because that's what his powers rely on is his muscles overgrowing his body. Um, it turns out this muscular guy is the one who killed that little hero hating boy's parents. And Deku has to protect the little boy from this muscular villain, which involves like a lot of physical sacrifices being made over the course of the fight, but it's still a really cool fight. And this whole storyline with the villains attacking the training camp is just like a survival game for the students. They're just trying to basically, because they were all separated at the time that the villains attacked, because it's a big old training camp like in the woods. Like they were all doing some training stuff, playing some training games, and generally having fun and learning how to use their powers. So they were all separated from each other and split up and distant. So when the villains attacked, like everyone was in different groups. So a huge chunk of this arc is everyone just trying to find each other and group back up so that they can have each other's backs. So you get a lot of interesting moments from some characters who don't often get the opportunity to shine, like when Tokoyami basically wears his own shadow. And it's just an interesting arc to watch unfold, especially once you learn what the villain's actual goal for attacking the camp at this time is. I'm not going to spoil that in this video. I'll talk about that in the next one, because their reasons for being there in this fight are actually way more important for the next fight than they are actually for this one. Because this particular arc is kind of constructed a little more like a mystery box. Like, what do the villains want? Why are they here? What are they after? Like, All Might isn't here at this training camp, so what could they possibly want with our class by coming here? And then, like, the next arc, the fight that is built basically on this one relies way more on their reasoning for being here than this actual fight does. So, but yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the stretch of story, basically from the end of the Stain fight to the end of the arc that actually comes after this training camp one, is one of my favorite like stretches of story in My Hero Academia, particularly because because of sort of the things that happen around Bakugo as a character, which I will actually have to get into more in the next video, because it'll actually be more relevant to the next video. But yeah, like a lot more of the events start to involve Bakugo as a character and as a driving force of the plot. And Bakugo, now anyone who's familiar with the series is going to know that like this is a popular opinion. This is like a very basic like most My Hero fans think this, but Bakugo is one of my favorite parts of this entire series because of like the drama that he's able to bring to the story, as well as the impact he has on the plot and the developments that he's able to make as a character. You can see him slowly changing from just a stock mean bully that he starts the series out as. You can see him turning into something more. Like, there's a reason that Bakugo is, even though he's a bully, there's a reason he's in a superhero school rather than becoming a villain. So, and this collection of volumes, as well as the ones I will be talking about in the next video, really explore that a little bit more. So, yeah. My Hero Academia, or Boku no Hero Academia if you're annoying, created and written by Kohei Horikoshi and illustrated by Horikoshi and his team, and published in Shonen Jump, or here in America, published just in these volumes. So, if you enjoyed this video, or think it may have directed you towards an interesting series, though honestly this far into a series, I don't know why you would be looking to me for, like, direction at this point. I'm still kind of figuring out what this My Hero Academia video series really is, because I keep kind of just giving basic rundowns of plot, without adding much in terms of discussion. So you know what? I think in future My Hero Academia videos, I'm going to kind of start getting into spoilers more, and I think getting into more of an actual discussion on the things in these books, because I'm still kind of, I guess, figuring out what this channel is, and to start with, and I still very much want to be able to do this, but to start with, the whole thing is directing people towards, comic books, like helping to get beginners into comic books, which is why I haven't really gone in depth on anything from the big two, DC and Marvel, because those ones are harder to get into, especially right now, because both publishers, concerning like some of their bigger characters, are actually at a bit of a transition point right now. So, yeah, I guess in the future, concerning the My Hero Academia comics, it's I guess going to be less of a, hey, you should go read this, because you should just assume that if I'm making a video about a comic book, that's basically me saying you should go read this. I mostly talk about books that I personally enjoy on this channel. That's like my goal, because I'm thinking, like, if I want to get people into comic books, I should talk about the ones that I think are good, because chances are other people will think they're good, and it gives me more to be able to talk about, because this isn't a review channel. So yeah, I guess in the future, these My Hero Academia books, since I've gotten past the first few arcs, they're more going to be a discussion or a meditation on the story, and the characters, and I guess the direction that the series takes and what I personally think of it. So, because at this point, if you've made it to a video about the 7th, 8th, and 9th volumes of an ongoing series, like, you shouldn't need to be directed towards that series. You know what I mean? Because who's gonna start reading a series at the 7th volume? I mean, I guess that happens with manga a lot, but still, that just feels weird to me. For me, if I'm going to read a series, I like to start at the beginning, personally. I find that it's a very good place to start. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video and want to hear more of my thoughts on this series as well as other comic books in general, like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's in order. You don't get a choice in the matter. So that's it. I hope you have a good day.